joined by Brian Wesbury, who I assume is in Chicago. Of course, Brian is an American economist, beloved of this audience in the afternoons. He never gets up this early. Chicago people sleep until noon. But he's back. He decided to get out of bed because market panics are interesting. Hello, Brian. Welcome back.
Hugh, it is great to be back with you. Great to be with you.
Now tell me, you must be in demand today like you are whenever there are crazy markets. What do you think generally of what happened yesterday and what is ahead this week?
Yeah, well, I look at yesterday as more of a panic. Now, what's interesting is we had not responded. The markets, in fact, it just continued to go up during all of this. And then, I'm just reporting news that everybody knows already. But once we saw Italy, Iran, South Korea start reporting more cases, then all of a sudden everybody said, "Oh no, it's not as contained as we thought," and so we just got it all in one day. I continue to believe that this, and I'm not a pandemic expert. I'm not trying to be an immunologist, and I'm not just trying to cherry pick data. But if you really go inside the data, one of the pieces of news that I look at is active cases. So we know how many reported cases of coronavirus we have. What a lot of people don't follow is, yes, there are deaths. That's awful. It's terrible. I'm not making light of any of that. But there's also recovered cases. And so if you look at the total number of active cases that are out there today, it peaked at 58,700 back on February 17th, and it's now down to less than 50,000. So that number has turned the corner, and my belief is that, like most of these things we've seen in the kind of modern era, it will continue to turn the corner. That we've gotten to the worst part, even though there's the potential. There's always the potential that my optimism about these numbers, or the fact that the World Health Organization isn't willing to say it's a true pandemic yet, that those thoughts are wrong, and so that's what the market was trying to price in. How much is it going to affect global growth, and are we wrong that it's going to burn out like socks?
When you sit there and you talk to your First Trust portfolio clients, they want to know what is the situation. And this is where I think the market has trouble, is that we have totalitarian regimes like China and Iran, which will not level with us. And,
right.
and that makes it impossible to accurately predict scope, scale, consequences for the supply chain, for the economic sideline, much less the human suffering. How does the market deal when you have regimes like, especially Iran? China's been relatively open. We know they have 80,277 cases, according to the South China Morning Post, 2,700 deaths, 27,471 recovered. That goes to your net that you're talking about. But right. They're relatively transparent. Iran is just lying. So what does the market do with that?
Yeah, I totally agree about Iran. But I guess the good news with Iran is that everybody shut their borders. And in fact, those borders were, I get it in the mountains. It's, it's really hard to shut things down. But people aren't flying in and out of Iran anymore. And if they're lying, they're going to pay a huge consequence for this in lives for their own citizens. You know what I find, these regimes, Iran and China today, are under fire. President Trump has put both of them under pressure. China with tariffs, Iran with a military response, and if they continue with social media out there today, with so much news out there today, these totalitarian regimes are being watched like never before. And, this isn't 1918. It's not, you can't get away without having someone leak news. And so what I find fascinating is that this is going to put pressure on them to open up. And when I think longer term, that's a positive for the world, that if you do lie, you are stained in the global view of you more than you have ever been. And so that's one great thing. I mean, social media, if we had reported every single day the number of people that had gotten influenza A and just the flu, we had 15 million cases in the United States this year. We had 140,000 of those people got hospitalized, and 8,200 people died. So imagine if the market and all the players and all the investors of the world were looking at those cases every single hour, every single day, waiting for the updates. It's massively larger than the coronavirus, and I think that's one thing we have to do is put this in perspective. And the flu is pretty dangerous, and it's much more virulent than the coronavirus has been so far. You know, I get it; it's a new virus, but the fact of the matter is, when you compare it to just the flu, it's small right now. And
so mortality of the flu is 0.07%. Mortality for
Correct.
coronavirus at this early stage is 2%. What worries me the most, Brian Wesbury, is the 1918 epidemic, not the press clampdown. That's not going to happen, but the fact that it mutated a dozen times between its spring arrival and its fall killing. That means it goes through passages and it becomes more virulent before it begins to weaken. In other words, we may be on the beginning of the beginning, not the end of the end. And how does the market price that in?
Yeah, and what I'm going to tell you is I don't think it can. And so when we look at the impact on the market directly, it's like Hugh, and I don't know if any of us can. We know the stats outside of China. The death percentage is way less than 2%. It's like 1% or even a little less so far. And what that tells me, by the way, just talking about totalitarian regimes, is that China, in many places, does not have a great healthcare system, not compared to the West. And that's one of the reasons that their death toll is higher. But having said that, we know factories are shut down. One of the pieces of good news is that companies were already moving their supply chains out of China due to the Trump tariffs, and that's going to blunt the impact somewhat. But we know. I mean, when we get the phone calls and the reports from Starbucks, from Apple, from companies that produce in China and sell into China, it's going to have an impact on their earnings. We know Chinese GDP, with this many shutdowns of factories, is going to be hit hard in the first and second quarter. But at least so far, from a macroeconomic point of view, all right, forget the reports from companies that have sales in China and production in China. But right now, we don't see a spike in layoffs in the U.S. We haven't seen a big drop in economic data in the U.S. So I'm not going to tell you that there's no economic impact here, but I think it's going to be smaller unless this thing becomes a Spanish flu type of pandemic, which the way I look at that, Hugh, is it's not 1918 anymore. I mean, we have already – it's going to be 3 months from the first day we learned about this virus and got its genome to when a company in the U.S. is going to have stage 1 tests for a drug to combat it. And that's a record. You know, with SARS, it was 20 months. And so that's the difference, I think, between 1918 and today, is that I guess we could come up with that it mutates and that this new drug isn't going to be the right one in 2 months. But the bottom line is these immunologists are so smart. The tools they have are so unbelievably powerful that they're able to rush something to the market in 3 months instead of 20 months. And it's been less than 15 years since. Last question. Yep.
Last question, Brian. Yesterday, the sage of Omaha came out and said, "Look, it's scary, but I'm not selling my stocks." What's your advice to investors? Are you a Buffett fan here? Do you agree with him?
Yep, same thing. That's exactly what I was telling everybody yesterday too. It's don't panic. And what we have, there's always the chance that that something explodes, that we do get a Spanish flu again. But I mean, I learned about, and so did you, I'm sure, in high school history class, you learned about Spanish flu. And, for me, that was 35 years ago. And how many times have we heard it's coming back, and it hasn't? And that doesn't mean that it couldn't. But I just think there's something different about the healthcare systems of the world today, especially the last decade with the genome sequencing that we can now do and the testing on computers that we can now do. That I just think the world is not in totalitarian regimes, but in the freer, more capitalist world, we're more prepared for something like this. And as a result, I'm even more. I mean, if you would have stayed invested during the Spanish flu, you would have been fine. If you would have stayed invested during SARS, you would have been fine. And so why should I treat this any different? I'm just not willing to do that yet. I think you could pay a huge price by not being in the market when it rebounds.
Brian Wesbury, always good to talk to you. Say hello to Frank, my friend, for me and to everyone at First Trust. Keep getting up early. I know you Chicago people hate it, but I appreciate it very, very much. Follow him on Twitter at Wesbury. I've forgiven him for the 2016 Cubs win over the Indians, so he's back. He's back in our good graces again. Thank you, Brian.